to get access to like the juicy documents, the documents that are going to truly give you the answers you're seeking, are very, very hard.
At this point, and I would argue this 100%, UFOs are definitely real.
Absolutely. You can make that argument that there is no question there's aliens out there. There's no question that they're visiting us. If you get enough pieces of the puzzle, eventually you get to see what the puzzle is.
Michael Panicello is the state director for the Connecticut MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. He's here with us tonight, and we're going to talk about UFOs and other things. Michael, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. Thank you for coming. So, could you just tell us what MUFON is?
Right. So MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network. They started in 1969 as the Midwest UFO Network. They started as a result of the closure of Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was a program run by the U.S. government in the 1960s to look at UFO phenomena in the U.S. skies, but worldwide as well. When the Project Blue Book ended, they had a committee called the Condon Committee formed, and their conclusions were basically everything in the sky is explainable, man-made, or people are crazy, um, or it's natural phenomenon. MUFON came as a result of that, where individuals wanted to continue to explore these unexplained sightings in the sky. So from 1969 onward, they branched out. There's a chapter in every state. We're also worldwide. We have chapters in France and Canada, and we're moving into other areas, other countries as well, um, based on membership. There's three parts to MUFON. The first part is to educate the public on ufology, so lectures by their members, either at like podcasts such as this, or lectures at a library, or private events, our own chapter meetings where we can have public events. The second part is to do UFO research, and the third is to investigate UFO sightings. So if someone in their we saw something in their skies, either whether it's in New York or Connecticut or any state, and they reported it to MUFON, a field investigator would come out or speak to you on the phone and try to determine what exactly you saw. So those are the three parts of MUFON, and that's what MUFON statement and mission is.
Very cool. So, what is the most interesting thing to you right now in the whole field of ufology, or whatever we might call it, the broader field? What
Yeah,
what is what is kind of what's keeping you going right now the most?
I think right now it's for those of you that read the newspapers or follow the local news, you probably have been seeing a lot more UFOs and ufology in the mainstream media than you have in the past. They all started really, um, again in earnest in December of 2017, when the New York Times, by a lady named Leslie Keene, published an article, and she co-wrote it with someone. I can't remember his name, to be honest with you, um, talking about a secret government program that was investigating UFO sightings. And from there was leaked videos, Tic Tac, the gimbal, the Go Fast. Those are the three videos that are out there. You can Google them to find them. But what that's brought about was a reawakening in the public's eye of unknown phenomena in our skies. And from that, um, we have had congressional hearings, we've had reports written by the Department of Defense. We now have another program called ARROW, which is the acronym, uh, investigating UFO sightings. Very similar, although they don't like to say they're Project Blue Book reincarnated, but very, very similar, same characteristics as Project Blue Book. where they go and they collect investigations, they collect sightings, they collect the data, and then they analyze it. So I think right now what's keeping me going is that there's this reawakening in the public's eye that we have this unknown phenomena in our skies. It's not being explained by conventional means. The government, though they say they are not able to identify it, they don't really go into much detail of their sources and methods. And I understand that. So that's a little bit frustrating because you kind of want to know how are they, what are their criteria they're using. But the fact that they're out there and they're investigating it and it's public and it's no longer in the shadows, because there's always the assumption in the past that Project Blue Book never ended, that it became more of a classified program. And there's a lot of evidence for that. There's OSAP. And then again, like I said, the ATIP program that was in the New York Times article showed that after 1969, um, the military was still investigating the UFOs. But during that period of time, ufologists were really kind of ridiculed, to be honest with you. We were the people with the tinfoil hats on our heads, the one that no one's ever took seriously, and that everything that we were saying as UFOs is probably man made or explainable in other means. And now that the government is coming out and saying, we don't know what these are, um, they're in our skies, but now we're going to actively and seriously investigate these. And the serious is important because one thing about kind of investigating it, but now they're actually putting the money where their mouth is by forming the Arrow Committee. They're putting dollars to this. And so for me, these last few years have been really exciting because though I don't know if we're going to have disclosure in the traditional sense, the fact that these are bringing out questions and is bringing attention to the field, it's it's nice to be able to share this with people and talk about this and not be ridiculed and not be made fun of, as so often was the case in the past. So it's a nice change of pace. And I think that's what's really exciting to me because it's kind of letting us be ourselves, be taken more seriously.
Yeah, I can relate to that as a researcher myself and always being open minded to it. And the more that I studied the UFO subject, the more I just more and more through the years I was realizing that there was a lot of evidence that it was real, because my whole life you're just conditioned, and I didn't even think about flying saucers and UFOs, and I was always an open minded, always kind of a deep thinker, looking for other explanations for reality, right? And with the flying saucer thing, I just all I associated with was Twilight Zone and sci-fi from the 50s. It was, like, cool to me, flying saucers were cool, but I never was like, "This is a real thing," until I started reading some books, and I was like, "Oh, this is for real."
Yeah.
And then I got deeper into it, and I was like, "Oh, shit, it's real." And then the thing happened this summer with Grush, after me probably going down, like, a 2, 3-year rabbit hole of UFOs. And then I was like, "Oh, wow, like, it's really real." And
Yeah.
now I'm seeing there's been evidence all along, but it is another level now with this. It's another level, and I can relate to what you said because it felt so vindicating.
Hmm.
Because, I'm like the friend with the conspiracy theories and this and that, but really I'm just an open-minded person,
Yeah.
and it's like, "Whoa." And that's one of the things with whatever ends up coming out is it says a lot, I think, for society because this is such a big conspiracy theory, right?
Hmm.
Secret government UFOs, like, it sounds crazy, and then it's like, when it comes out, wow, so all these people, like you said, the tinfoil hats,
Hmm.
they were right all along. What else is, that's been branded fringe might be part of our reality, so I don't know.
And that's what's exciting. I mean, you can go down the fringe element, and there's so many possibilities that you can explore. Um, and I don't know if you want to get into them tonight, but it does. Like I don't just like ufology. I like cryptozoology, and I like looking at classified military aircraft, and um, even to extent the paranormal and the demonic.
Mm.
And though those have nothing to do with MUFON or ufology, you're right. Like you said, that the fringe is becoming, well, maybe there is more to the fringe and more accurately and what's correct and makes sense. than what people have been saying, and um, I think it's a really kind of a paradigm shift in the field of ufology, but just in fringe sciences in general.
Yeah, I remember I had watched a couple documentaries recently about parapsychology,
Hmm.
and I'm sure you know about the CIA projects and all that stuff that's documented with remote viewing.
Hmm.
And that was kind of another stone that I hadn't really turned over, and I was interested in that. But people are so. I remember I posted a YouTube video, a short one, and it was just showing some of the research, and just people are just like, "This is not real science. This is crazy." And the thing that's interesting about that I'm finding is that the UFOs, there seems to be a lot of evidence that the UFOs are operated with some type of psychic component.
Hmm.
And some of the whistleblowers are saying that. And that's something that's been experienced, I guess, for decades by from different people or reported from different people. But that's pretty interesting,
It is.
the psychic phenomenon. And that guy, James Lukatsky, you mentioned OSAP, he made that book recently talking about what OSAP did, and I listened to his podcast on the Jeremy Corbell podcast, and
Hmm.
that was something he said and hinted at. He was saying we don't know we have no idea what capabilities humans have, and I think he was really hinting at the parapsychological and all that.
Yeah, I know a few people. Um, I know a few people that dabble in remote viewing, and what they can do is pretty interesting. They know people, and they're in the field that look at the that know people that are been doing it for decades and are really the top people in the field. And when you see what those individuals can remote view or experience, or however you want to define it, it's absolutely mind blowing how your body can literally come out of your body. Your spirit can come out of your body and transcend time and space. It's you may not believe it, but when they talk about it, when they describe what they see and they do and their interactions, it's absolutely mind blowing to say the least. And if you're going to explore that more, I would think you're going to have a really interesting time and enjoyable time learning about that, because it definitely shows that our consciousness is much more than what our human bodies are.
Wow. Is there anything of these people's experience that you would want to share any more detail on?
It's really not my place to say, but
Yeah.
I mean, you could just Google some of the, like, most of these people are on YouTube. They're big in the field. You can, if you were to Google like remote viewing conferences, I think there was just one in New Hampshire or New England, somewhere in New England recently. I mean, you can even go back and look at like some of the founders, like Ingo Swann, and what this individual has experienced, the level of consciousness he was able to reach, and his involvement with the government, specifically with their remote viewing program. Um, he was truly a unique individual. But that's going a little outside of MUFON, so I don't want to go too far onto that, because then I'm not we don't do that in MUFON. That's not part of our. We stick to the UFOs. That's going more into the fringes. So
Right. Some of the UFO investigations from MUFON, I would imagine the people experience something paranormal, though. Yes.
yeah, so we don't call entities of that nature paranormal. We call it's they're more like multidimensional beings. Um, I will say that I don't know if you. I will say that a lot of abductees have two types of experiences. They either have a very positive experience when they're either abducted, or have an interaction with an alien or some kind of being. And it's either positive in the fact that they're given information, they're given enlightenment, um, they're shown something greater than themselves in the world, and they come back um, looking at humanity in a different way, looking at us more as we are all one people, not, you know, not a member of a country, not a member of a religion or a political party. We are all human. We are all one being on this cosmic scale, so we are all connected in that respect. So it's just more of a higher level of consciousness. On the flip side of that, there are abductees and people that have interacted with aliens, whether in a close encounter format, that have had a negative experience, that have been absolutely terrified, have been assaulted in a way, or have been experienced negative feelings or vibrations, if you want to call it, or negative, like some kind of negative consciousness. You might in the if you were to go in the paranormal, maybe be more demonic, but like I said, we don't connect the two. But they've had a very frightening experience to it. So you have
Mm.
these two different experiences by people. What makes one have a positive experience and another have a negative experience? I don't know that answer. I know that it happens and that is there. Uh, Maybe it's the type of aliens that abduct them. Maybe it's their connection somehow to something else. I don't know, but so you could, if you want to call the negative more paranormal, um, I like I said, we won't call it that. Some people do, and there is talk within the field of ufology outside of MUFON, where in ufologists are connecting the two. So they're trying to say, well, you know, these entities are no longer coming from spacecraft, as which was the traditional sense in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but rather these beings are more interdimensional in shape. So, not heavenly or demonic or, from hell as a paranormal investigator, but we would use the more scientific way of saying they're from another dimension coming here. Maybe it's a negative dimension, maybe it's a positive dimension. And this kind of debate is starting to reshape ufology in general outside of our organization, but within the overall field. There is this discussion, this new dichotomy of how they're looking at these abductions, because there are so many negative ones, and because these negative ones and are involved with beings that are more not in your traditional sense, where they come down in a craft, as like with Travis Walton and his abduction, or Betty and Barney Hill with their abduction, which are traditional craft. They see a craft, the craft is in front of them, the craft takes them, and then they're returned, but they have negative experiences while on that craft.
Mm.
Now there is a lot of abductions where people are having experiences in some kind of realm, some kind of location, and where that is, I don't know. So, but that's kind of how it is within the field of ufology. To answer your question, like that's kind of how that's approached
Mm.
with ufology and MUFON. We would say we would acknowledge that, we would respect that, we'll document it,
Mm.
um, but we wouldn't use the word paranormal. That we do not use that in that, because paranormal to us is a different field than the field of ufology. They're not connected.
Yeah.
Ufology is ufology, and paranormal is paranormal.
Yeah, I think paranormal is kind of a blanket term,
Yeah,
and it's not even my favorite word to call it. If I had to reduce it to something, I would just call it consciousness.
yeah,
So, effects of consciousness, or experience consciousness. And yeah, that's interesting though. The abduction phenomenon is an interesting one. What do you think, in your opinion, is going on with the negative experiences of the abductions? What could, because I've heard a lot of different opinions on this. I know one person who, he was some kind of scientist, or his specialty was probability. and doing prior probabilities. He was on some podcast, and he works for some kind of social organization at a university, and he had some interesting opinions. And he was saying if a civilization of beings were so advanced that they could make interdimensional craft, or go through whatever it might be, quantum entanglement, travel, whatever it
Mhm.
ends up being. And I think it's going to end up being a bunch of different things. I feel like we tend to think in it's this or that, when they're like where you were saying how people are saying they're extra dimensional, extraterrestrial, like not physical. I think it's just everything, can be
Yeah.
everything. Same thing with the what the propulsion or the energy systems are. But the sociologist was saying he doesn't see how it would be a very low probability that a civilization that advanced would be like probing, biological humans and like sampling things to do tests, because that's like the typical explanation I feel from most is they're testing things or doing genetic experiments. I don't know what your take is on all that, but
Well, for the positive and the negative, I think we have good and bad humans. I mean,
hmm
human society has the gamut of types of people. We have people that can do absolutely horrific things to other people, and we have people that will do very generous things and giving of so
mm,
why would aliens not have that, or beings, if you want to call them beings or aliens, whatever the term is you want to use, why would they not have the same thing? To make the assumption that just because they're advanced civilization doesn't mean they're a warlike civilization is a human assumption that you evolve to a point where you don't believe in war or violence. I mean, that's like Star Trek. We're not living
totally.
in a utopian society, and I don't think the universe is a utopian universe. I mean, there's
hmm
good and evil, I think. Not going into the spiritual realm on that, but I do think that there are in our Earth existence on this little planet, we can see that clearly.
Well, it makes sense, and it's like there's the hermetic saying of "as above, so below," and
Right,
that the worlds are all reflections of each other.
right.
So I agree with you 100%. I think there is probably a full spectrum. So do you think some of the negative abduction stuff is more an act of aggression than like something that's useful for their science, or both?
No,
Or
I mean, I've heard a lot of it. A lot of, like, when I mentioned about the assaults, people will say that they've been assaults. A lot of times there would be their reproductive genetic material for men and women are taken from them. I mean, they don't freely give that to the aliens. It's taken from them. That's a very violent and intrusive act. Um, I think if you, again, I only have humanity as a reference, but we look at animals.
I was
You
just
know,
thinking that
we
before you said that.
what when scientists go someplace, what's the first thing they do? They collect samples. I mean, all
Yeah.
kinds of mammals. They'll take down from the amoeba and this right up to like a full blown animal that, well, you
Mm,
can argue the consciousness of animals. That's another discussion. But I mean, they hurt them. They dissect
yep.
them, they look at them, they study them, they put them in cages
hmm
for science. So why would you not think an alien would do the same thing? I mean, if they're explorers and they come upon a planet like ours and they're curious of who we are and how we function, basic science, I mean, look, again, would be like, well, let's take some samples and figure out what these things are.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It's such a good perspective looking at that. Yeah, wow. So you've been researching the whole subject a long time,
Hmm.
and what's your opinion on what kind of contact has been established with governments or
Well, that's the gray
humans
area.
of power? Yeah.
That's the real gray area of ufology. So before I answer that question, I'll make a little statement.
Yeah.
You might have experienced this yourself because you did your deep dive into ufology, but you may have noticed, and anyone who's listening to this might notice, that ufology is a gray area. There's no black and white. There's no definitive evidence for, there's no definitive evidence against. There's, a lot of circumstantial evidence. And I think for a lot of cases, for example, Roswell, we've sent people to prison on circumstantial evidence. You can go into court and win a court case on circumstantial evidence if there's abundance of circumstantial evidence. And I think with a lot of these cases, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that shows that something happened. And a great example of this is when I just mentioned Roswell. There's many very good research books on Roswell, and I think that the evidence of all these people that were involved, that um, if you want to read a good book on this, it's Witness to Roswell by Tom Carney and Don Schmidt. Um, they spent like 30 years looking into Roswell, and they wrote excellent books on this topic. And you can't not read the book and say there is something that happened. There is something that crashed there. For the fact that it starts off with the government releases a press release that they recovered a UFO, to that it gets rejected right away, to all of the witnesses, and they've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of witnesses and secondary witnesses, like grandkids and sons and daughters and wives and husbands of people that were the primary sources who were there, and all of their stories match. And these people have no connection to each other, they have no relation to each other, and they're all telling the same thing. The odds of that are astronomical. Um, but then there's other sightings like Bentwater UFO sighting in Bentwater, England in 1980. And you have the base deputy commander, and you can watch his YouTube videos. He's all over YouTube, Colonel Halt. He's still on the UFO circuit, I think. Um, Talking about this sighting, he wrote a memo to European Command that got released, and you can find that on the internet, that talks about the description of these sightings. He had a like a, a 70s version of a tape recorder, and he recorded in live time what he was witnessing and what his men were witnessing at the time. So there's a lot of evidence. And you have Maelstrom Air Force Base, where you have the military people seeing a orb and all of their ICBM missiles shut down. Um, those are really compelling pieces of evidence. Can you prove that they're UFOs? No, but our technology, as we know it, can't replicate any of that. So if it's not ours, then by definition, it's an unknown. Um, so where there's contact? Well, here's where it gets into the gray area. So with Roswell, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and I'm going to use that term conspiracy theory, even though I don't like it, because it goes back to the tinfoil hat people.
It's
But
been co-opted as a dismissal word now.
right, exactly. But a conspiracy is just a group of people conspiring to do something, and in
Yeah.
this case, they're conspiring to keep it a secret. So you're right; it's been co-opted against its original term. But my point is that with Roswell, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that contact was made. Some reports say there was an alien being that was made, that was still alive in the crash. Some say it was dead. Some reports say it died shortly after being recovered. And when it was alive, they made contact. They being the U.S. government. There's a story that is on the in ufology that Eisenhower had a secret treaty and met with the aliens at an Air Force base. And in exchange for technology, he and the U.S. government allowed abductions to happen. There's another rumor out there that um, we actually visited another planet, and the link to that is in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If you remember in that movie, at the end, the very, very, very end of the movie, when the craft lands and all the people come off the craft, you remember that if you watch that movie, or if you haven't watched it, at the end, there's like 12 astronauts. And these 12 astronauts go on the craft. I don't know. And
It happened. I just happened to be. I'm weird like this with movies. There's some of those like classic ones that are in something I'm super interested in that I've just never seen, and I kind
Yep,
of like that, and I'm like, I will see it when the time's right. So I haven't seen Close Encounters, and I almost like don't want it to mess with my perception of how my whole UFO journey has gone, which has been so spontaneous and organic. So, but I do want to watch that. So, but that's why I'm not I'm not like getting the reference, but I'm
that's
listening.
fine.
It's great.
Well,
Yeah.
when you do, or if you do, or your audience has listened or watched it, at the end of the
Mhm.
movie, there's a scene where astronauts go on to the spacecraft and take off. Now, there's a book out there called Project Serpo, and this book is
Mm.
supposedly written by leaked um, defense intelligence documents, which was a briefing that was given to Ronald Reagan when he became president of the United States. I think it was at Camp David, talking about this project, Serpo, where we made contact with the aliens at Roswell. They told us how to make contact with them. We opened up a dialogue. We sent people to there, which were these 12 astronauts. They spent several years there. They eventually came back, and this is what this is. But the documents are hard to verify, and that's the problem. All of these rumors out there, it's very, very hard to document the provenance of any of these sources. So again, it goes into the gray area. They're very interesting stories. They make a lot of sense. There's a reference to them in the movies. There's other indirect references by other accounts, but if you're a researcher and you need the primary source and you need to document the provenance of a primary source, it's very hard in ufology to do that.
Mhm.
The best way is through the FOIA request and getting documents from the government. But again, you get redacted documents or you don't get anything at all because there's a lot of exemptions to the FOIA, especially for national security. So to get access to like the juicy documents, the documents that are going to truly give you the answers you're seeking, are very, very hard, or they're out there, but there's so much question over the provenance of them that it almost puts them into questions. For example, like the Majestic 12 documents, they were leaked in the 80s. There's two sides of the fence on those. Some people adamantly say that these documents are true government documents that have been leaked. Others on the other side of the fence say no, these documents are complete forgeries. They're been made up. And you can argue evidence on both sides by looking at the documents. Another one is the Davis Wilson document that talks about um, I forgot what it, I'm drawing a
Yeah,
blank on what it
the
is.
Wilson memo where
Yeah,
he was asked to get into some special access program that
that's
someone
it.
told him was they were doing UFO stuff, and
Yep,
they denied him, and he was the Joint Chief of Staff. That one's really interesting. Did you that guy's still alive, right?
he is.
Has anybody ever why has he never been asked about this that I've found? I haven't
Oh,
researched
people
too
have
deeply on it,
asked
but yeah.
this Wilson. People have asked the parties involved,
What
and
does
they've
he
asked
say?
the defense intelligence. He hasn't responded. Um, he won't. To my
Uh-huh.
personal knowledge, I don't
Yeah.
know that he's ever made a comment on them.
Mhm.
But the providence of it is can't be verified. And just like with the MJ12 documents, and all these other stories, the Serpo documents,
Mhm.
there's cases to be made that they are true, and there's cases to be made that they're not true, and so everything falls in the gray area.
Right.
And for that reason, to answer your original question, it's very difficult to know for sure
Yeah.
if you're going to
And
use that metric as a evidence.
of course, yeah, and I think evidence is important, and so I feel like that's definitely true for the question of what kind of contact has been established, if any, slash whatever. Would you agree with me though that there's enough high quality documents and evidence to prove that at this point, and I would argue this 100%, that UFOs are definitely real. You know,
Absolutely,
we've gotten past that. Like with evidence, you can totally. It's there's just too much, and we're talking
absolutely.
government evidence. Even the first hearing in 2022,
Mm.
technically, because they literally said we've narrowed it down that they're physical. We know they're physical. and that was the key part because then it's like, okay, that's a flying thing. Then they said it was being maneuvered by something. So we got it kind of on the record for real in 2022. And now, of course, with the, Fravor saying what he saw, Graves, it's kind of like it's out.
Absolutely.
Disclosure started already,
Yeah.
but now where is it going?
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you that you can make that argument that there is no question there's aliens out there. There's no question that they're visiting us. I think that evidence is overwhelming. What I would, but I would say to your previous question, to the level of our interaction with them, I think is still in the gray area.
Yeah, I agree. And what was a big one for me talking about documents, that 1947 Nathan Twining memo.
Hmm.
That one's one of the best, I think, because here's the top one of the top Air Force officers at a crucial time after World
Hmm.
War II, all that. They did a whole assessment on the flying saucers, and that's what he reported back was, we know they're not fictitious. We know it's not hallucination or mass hysteria. They're real physical objects. They're discs. They're
Hmm.
moving like this and that in 1947. And when I read that, that was almost the closer for me. I was like, okay, I've seen enough. And this was the icing on the cake.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that.
Now, shifting to your experience a little bit at MUFON, what what kind of cases have been the most interesting that you've seen in Connecticut since you've been the director?
One of the most common cases we get two cases that are very common. We have orb sightings and we have triangle sightings. And triangle sightings are pretty standard traditional triangles. They're equilateral triangles. They have three white lights on each corner of the triangle, and underneath they have a blinking red light. I will be honest with you, a lot of them are sometimes misidentified as aircraft on final approach, commercial aircraft specifically on final approach or departure,
Mhm.
um, for the very reason that the navigation lights on these craft, um, when they're below 10,000 feet and they, or will have like, they have the white beacon lights on either wings. They have the collision light under on the main fuselage underneath of it.
Mhm.
Um, when the landing gear is down, they have the landing gear light on. So sometimes that looks like a triangle shaped craft. I've seen that where my previous job, I was right over the flight path to Bradley, and every night you can see little triangles flying overhead.
That's
But
interesting.
when you rule out where they are within the flight paths of the common aircraft patterns that are in Bradley or any of the surrounding airports in Connecticut, and you start seeing these craft in places where you don't normally typically see aircraft, and they have a lot of common characteristics. They're very slow, they're very quiet.
Mm,
Aircraft are fast. Even when they're on a final approach, they pass over your head pretty quickly
right.
most part. But these craft are moving at a very, I would like to say, a turtle-like speed. They're very very slow. They're very very quiet. Um, I find them fascinating. And on Google, there's the patents for the TR-3B, which shows that maybe they're ours. That there's some kind of surveillance aircraft. I don't
Mhm.
know. That's another discussion for another day. I think because you can go down a rabbit hole on that for the rest of our podcast. But I think they're interesting. I really do find them interesting, especially because they were involved in the Hudson Valley UFO sighting. There was those type of craft, among other craft scenes. But then in Belgium, they had the triangle wave in Belgium. Um, and if there's a really good book by Leslie Keane on that, that talks about the Belgium UFO wave, and they were triangles. So
And
I,
I remember in Nevada, Art Bell, I
mhm,
remember that he would say that everyone in his town that lived very close to Area 51, it was like a normal thing. People were like, "Oh yeah, you saw one the other day."
yeah,
It was like a common thing.
yeah, and Area 51 is ours. So you kind
Mhm.
of wonder, is it ours? Is it theirs? But they're everywhere, and they're very very common in Connecticut, especially along the Connecticut New York border. We get a lot of sightings of
Oh.
those around there. Um, so it's interesting. The other
You
thing I think
you
is
still get them recently? Are they as big as the Hudson Valley ones, or are they smaller?
it depends on the witness.
Yeah.
They're usually. couple 100 feet to a couple to like 90 feet. Um, People describe them as big as a house sometimes, which would be fall in the couple 100 feet range.
Mm.
Uh, but
Do
yeah,
they
I don't know
look
what
like
they
the
are.
Hudson Valley ones, or do they look like more like a TR3RB?
They
The
look more like
Connecticut
a
ones, I guess.
TR3B. They're more
Okay.
like a traditional triangle. Like if you were to take a
And
triangle,
so people are still seeing them like in 2023.
yeah, yeah, they are.
Interesting.
We have a lot of orb sightings, lights in the sky, but the orbs are interesting.
I just want to share. I had an orb sighting.
Really,
Yeah, and it was pretty cool.
they are.
And I
They
never
are.
get to I never get to share much, so I got to tell you real quick.
Yeah,
Um, I was camping in
yeah.
the Adirondack Mountains
Okay.
with three of my friends, and there was three of us out there, and we were sitting on top of this one of the highest peaks in the region, very remote region,
Hmm.
right? And we're looking at the Adirondack mountain peaks in the distance, the bigger ones. It's just huge mountain valley, no civilization, nothing.
Yep.
And you could see for as far as, your eye can see in the horizon. And we're out there for hours and hours. And then it's starting to get towards like dusk or just after sunset, just after the sun's out of the sky. And I'm looking at the horizon and I see something really bright. I have good eyes and I kind of know what things look like, you know.
Hmm.
And I'm like, "Oh, damn, is that a star already? That must be
Hmm.
like a planet or a star. It's really bright." And then I'm seeing it's like really bright and getting a little bigger. And then I said to my friends, my two friends, "Do you guys see this light? Do you see that light over there? Is that a star? Like, what is that?" And then my one friend noticed the distance changing, and he says it's getting closer to us. And I almost, for some reason, I didn't even realize, and it was getting closer. And then all three of us are looking at it, and it hovers over the valley, and we can see, like, it's so clear because there's no lights in the valley. We can see it's an orb. It's a glowing, really bright circle, and
Hmm.
it's just hovering there. And honestly, I started to just get a little bit nervous because I'm like, oh shit, this is something. And I'm like, we're out here in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
just the four of us. So I get a little bit, fight or flight, just a little.
Right.
And I'm like, and then we're all watching it very closely, probably all maybe thinking the same thing. And then it just vanishes
Wow.
instantly, and it's
You
gone. And
think
we
you were
all just start
abducted?
laughing.
Do you think
um,
you were abducted?
I don't think so because there was I didn't experience anything, and we went right into laughing about it and being excited about it.
Hmm.
And yeah, I don't think so, but it was something, and it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool to see, and it makes sense if you're out there on a mountain range like that
Yeah.
for that long. Like we were literally out there for the whole day,
Yeah.
and then it was that 120 seconds of a thing. So yeah, the orbs. Thanks for letting me share my story, and
Yeah. No.
uh,
No.
yeah, no, I want to hear what you were gonna say about the
Well,
orbs
the
too.
reason I asked about the abduction is I don't know if you've heard about the Allagashi abduction, and um,
No.
when you get chance later, Google it because
Mhm.
what these people happened, they were camping as well, and they were in the woods, and just like you, they saw a little orb, a bright light, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it was like almost on top of them, and then they had an abduction experience. But um,
So we got lucky.
so you
Yeah.
guys got lucky, but the characteristics of the way you saw it, the fact that it was not bright and then it became brighter, brighter and bigger, and until it was in front of you is very similar. It's the same. So when you get a chance, Google that or look it up. You might find it interesting. Orbs. So orbs are a really interesting thing for us. We used to get a lot of orbs that were actually misidentified as Chinese sky lanterns. For a while in Connecticut, they were very, very popular, especially along our shoreline. And in the summer, we used to call it the Chinese lantern season because we'd get reports and reports and reports, and they were always Chinese lanterns. And you say, well, how do you know? Well, Chinese lantern, they're slow. They move with the wind direction. They don't last very long because they usually burn up or the battery goes.
Mm.
And those characteristics are pretty common. But orbs themselves are usually characterized by zigzag motions, usual flight movements, flight characteristics, as what you experienced, um, going from very, very faint to very, very bright. They're and ufology as a whole, they're often reported around, seen at nuclear power plants like Maelstrom Air Force Base. You can argue that exciting that experience was an orb sighting. Um, Bentwaters, as I mentioned earlier, they also had an orb sighting. It was a little red orb that moved through the woods. There was nuclear weapons there, though it's not official, but unofficially, and the unofficial truth is that they were nuclear weapons there. Um,
Mm.
Orbs are also very difficult to determine now because of commercial drones. These things can do all the characteristics that an orb can do, and sometimes they're very tricky.
Mm.
Um, but you put an LED light on these drones, especially kids drones. There are you can kind of figure them out relatively easily. The other thing about orbs I find interesting is when we were talking about earlier that crossover to the paranormal field.
Mm.
Um, Orbs in paranormal are often related to like a spirit, either good or bad, or people usually will try and get a photo of an orb when they take photos in the dark or at a haunted location, or
Mm.
um, you would see like an orb. A friend of mine who's a paranormal investigator, he has a picture of an orb with an actual face inside of the orb, which is really freaky, but apparently very common in the field of paranormal research.
Mm.
So again, that transfer of is it paranormal, is it not? The other example that is ufology is Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know if you read the book by George Knapp, Skinwalker Ranch. His book on it was A Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch, or I forget the exact
I've
name.
heard him and James Lukatsky talk about it, but I haven't read it.
You should check it out. It's a really interesting book. In the book, what they talk about is that the original the homesteaders that were there before the homestead was sold to the Bigelow, they experienced blue orbs, and these blue orbs were negative entities or negative energy, whatever you want to call them. And the reason for that is they suspect that these orbs killed their dogs.
Mm.
Um, because there was an event in the book where these two dogs that they owned were chasing after a blue orb. They went over a ridge and they disappeared. The next day, when the owner went to go look for the dogs, he found two charred little circles of ash, which they assumed was the dogs. So somehow they vaporized the dogs.
Huh.
So orbs are really interesting because are they, again, that straddles the paranormal and ufology as we were talking about earlier. We would look at them more as like some kind of energy um, being, or something of that nature. But I think that they do occur a lot in Connecticut. And I think they're interesting. I don't really have much information on them because
Yeah.
they're still a bit of a mystery, but they do show up a lot in Connecticut, along all parts of Connecticut, whether it's up north by the Mass border or by the Rhode Island border or anything in between, even along New York. So it's those two are very common.
Yeah.
Um,
My only theory on them, I guess, is the genuine ones, like what I might have seen, is I would assume that they're highly advanced if they can kind of go through, like, seem to go to another dimension instantly, which would be, I think, would be a more advanced travel propulsion source, would be something where you can go into another dimension and warp space time. And so the ones that disappear and reappear or just disappear, I would think are pretty advanced. If the orb it might not be a craft in the traditional sense, but it might be some type of, like you said,
Probe.
entity of some of some kind.
Yeah, it
But
could be. You know, um it could be a probe. Some
mhm,
sightings nationwide or worldwide would say that um, they'll see orbs coming out of a larger craft, almost like, you know, like you're sending out a probe to go scout out an area.
mm,
And again, if you go back to the way humans operate, what we're doing now in the military is trying to develop drones that are working in tangent with fighter jets or
mm,
bombers, where
yeah,
um, I think was it the loyal wingman, I think they're calling it, where they have a drone that will pair itself with an advanced fighter, and it will work in tangent with them. So you can send that out to do reconnaissance, or you can have it do another task while you're doing a task. And that seems to be the way the U.S. and other militaries on our planet are trying to reinvent and reuse drone technology. Um, and maybe these advanced societies have used the same thing.
yeah.
On a side note, there's um, a retired associate professor. Her name is like Dr. Six Killer Clark,
Mm,
and she's a Native American woman, and she wrote a book about alien encounters in Mesoamerica.
mm,
And what she did is she interviewed a lot of different Native Americans who experienced interactions with a blue energy being. They're humanoid looking, but they're all energy. And some of the so could these beings, and sometimes they will move into a ball shape and then disappear. Could that be them? Could it be these blue entities? I don't know, but it's fascinating what could these orbs be, because these two, the triangles and the orbs, are very very common, and there's really no answer on what exactly 100% they are. Again, it falls into that gray area. There's circumstantial evidence for both, but there's nothing definitive on either.
yeah. And I think that that's what is really what makes ufology as a field really challenging, even when you compare it to other fields of study and history and whatnot. I guess there's just a lot of similarities to just general history, but there's not only gray areas and circumstantial evidence, some more compelling evidence, but there's also disinformation. And we
Mhm.
have hard evidence of intelligence agencies literally muddying the water with fake information about aliens and UFOs. So it's like you got to sort through all of that, and it's tough. And then you got to go to sources to know which sources were, misinformation or disinformation, and then it's more challenging. There's a lot, and I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that aspect of the field of the disinformation stuff from the intelligence agencies like the CIA, the NSA, whatever it might be.
So you can go on to the CIA website, or you can go on to, yeah, and type in MUFON, or you can go on the and you can read about how CIA agents have gone to our conferences. Um, so they've watched us before. As for disinformation, absolutely. There's a great investigative journalist out there, Annie Clark. Uh, she wrote a book called Area 51. I think I got her name right. Um, Annie Jacobson. I'm sorry, Annie Jacobson. It's on Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top
Mhm,
secret base, I think it's called. But she also wrote a book called Phenomenon,
mm,
and that talked about remote viewing. But what she said in those books was very interesting. Is that, you know, when these were around in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, these programs, Area 51 got started in the late 50s, no, early 50s, um, for the U2. There was a very big concern over the Cold War and Russia getting our technology. And they did use, and there's documentation out there that is hard evidence, that, actual documents, that they did use the UFO as a cover story to hide classified aircraft. Um, in her book Area 51, she talks about how when the U-2 pilots were on their final approach, or leaving when they were at lower altitudes, they'd wear a monkey mask, so that anyone who saw them on their, like, a little private plane or a commercial plane or whatever, and said, "Hey, there's a monkey flying a plane," people wouldn't believe them.
Mm.
But it was really an actual aircraft. Um, there's another book about, I can't think of his name. I'm drawing a blank. Talking
Have
about
you?
how a guy, who was
Have you?
listening to, a base in, New Mexico.
Oh yeah, that's Paul Benowitz.
Thank you.
Did you
Yes.
read that book, Mirage Men? Are you talking about that one?
Yeah. I
That
think
one's
so.
that one's good.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm
It-
trying to think.
it's a very skeptical book, but I feel like it's a really important read because it does expose the Richard Doty and the Paul Benowitz and that whole
Yeah,
aspect of it. Yeah,
but they basically gaslit the guy because
yeah,
they believe that he, just as a citizen watching the base next door, might have stumbled upon something classified. And so, in order to make sure he didn't reveal what he saw, they, and for lack of a better way, they drove the guy nuts. Um,
yeah.
so there's another example. Um, Another example is just UFO sightings that have been,
And
like.
William Moore too. He was a popular Bill Moore. He was a popular one of the top writers in the late 70s, right?
Mhm,
And then they were literally just feeding him fake documents,
mhm.
and yeah,
Yeah. So, um,
there's that to it too, that twist to it.
yeah, and and within all that comes in the MJ-12 documents, because they say that they got fed the MJ-12 documents as a way to, which gets back to my other point where, you know, maybe the MJ documents is more of a construct. Um, maybe there's some real things and some fake things. I don't know. Some
Yeah.
argue, some say like they fed them these fake documents.
Well, there's a lot of mystery with that because some of those guys, it's compelling to me because of the guys that were supposedly on it. Like
Mhm.
Hillenkotter, his quote is one of the craziest.
Yeah,
Do you know that when he came out of the was done with the CIA or whatever he did, he literally made a public statement saying that, you know that quote I'm talking about? It's pretty wild.
I don't remember that one specifically.
So the MJ-12 documents, you were saying there's a theory that they were constructed.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, who
again,
knows?
it's all in the gray area. Everything is in gray. But the U-2, the F-117, the B-2 bomber, even the new one that they have out now, the B-21 radar,
Mm,
all were, you can find UFO reports for them at the time, um, when they were classified. And then once they're declassified, and ufologists go back and they look at the time and location and the dates of when these things were flying, where they were flying, you kind of put two and two together. A good example of that is, um, the the afterburners of the SR-71 used to have a green tinge to them. It was the chemical that was in the, in the engine that burned green.
mhm,
People would report that as a UFO, like a green thing in the sky. Well, it turns out when that was declassified and they realized what was the fuel of the aircraft and where it was flying, that they matched it to a SR-71 Blackbird.
mm,
Um, Even the Ox Cart, the precursor, the CIA's version of the SR-71 Blackbird, which is the Air Force's version, um, all were misidentified as UFOs. Uh,
mm,
but the government never came out and said, "Hey, that's our craft." Yeah, that's just one of our reconnaissance planes, because it served their purpose to hide it from espionage, so that people just think, "Oh, it's just those crazy UFO people seeing stuff in the sky again." So there's a very long history of it, even going away from, um, like the MJ-12 documents, but looking at like the sources that Annie Jacobson used and talked about how they openly came out and said that this is a good cover for us. And you can go, like I said, go on the CIA website. You can read about it. There's some declassified stuff there. It's not really in a lot of depth, but sometimes you've got to kind of read between the lines.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, it makes perfect sense, especially as a counter espionage. What better way to hide what's in our skies than to say they're UFOs?
Yeah. How long do you think if we did it is it worthy of doing a deep dive on the Russian lake thing? Like, could we do a whole episode on that?
No, not
No.
really.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
because the reason is there's not a lot out there on it. There's a
Okay.
lot. There's the information that's out there. You can summarize it pretty quickly.
When you presented it, it was so unique to me. The
Yeah.
diver scene, and then wow, something really happened to them unexplainably. They died. It's like kind of a crazy story.
I mean, the basic story of it is that they were doing a training mission. They encountered these beings underwater. Um, they tried to capture one, and they repelled them with like some kind of energy weapon or some kind of not energy weapon, I should say, but some kind of force that literally pushed him out of the water, and they got the bends, and some of them died. the The interesting thing about that, I think, is twofold. The fact that they were in the water. A lot of UFO reports are water related. Catalina Island. I think that's why I like that topic I did so much. Is
Yeah.
there is this connection with UFOs and water, and we don't really know what it is. Some speculate that they use the hydrogen in the water, they separate it out as some kind of fuel, which is why in some sightings they are seen like actually envelop, like taking on water. I don't
Hmm.
know if you call it beaming it up, but they kind of are taking water from the lake or the ocean.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a great place to hide as well. The lake that lake was, I don't remember again off the top of my head how deep it was, but it's one of the deepest lakes on the planet. We can't really explore it that much, and it's a good place to hide. Same thing with the oceans as a whole. Um, y- the Russians weren't too clear on exactly what happened after that. The sources I got from it kind of just mentions it and goes on. But like I said, I can do a more deep dive on it if you want. We can always revisit this at another podcast.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, I think ufology. I'm excited for where the field's going to go. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning, and I think it sounds like you're kind of new in the field, but you really dove deep into it and you're getting your feet wet on it. But I think if you ride it out a little bit more, like I know you haven't seen it prior to, I guess, the legitimacy of it time. Like I think now it's kind of a legitimate, and I think it's because the government says it's legitimate. When the government came out and said there's nothing to see here with the closure of Project Blue Book, um, people are so conditioned that, well, if the government says, then that must mean it's true, because they all said like, oh, okay, there's nothing to see with ufology, and then the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s into the 2017, everyone's like, well, there's nothing there. The government says there's nothing there. And then the government comes out and says, there's something actually there. And now all of a sudden everyone is saying, oh, well, there's something to this ufology. The government's taking it seriously. And, um, I know you didn't get to experience that other part of it. But I think you're coming in at a really good time now, is what I'm trying to get to. And I think um, for you being new, I don't think it will discourage you as much as if you started this in the 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s or the early 2000s, during that period where it was a very difficult time, I think, to be in the field. A very smaller field, I should say. So I think I'm excited for you as you start your journey into this field. Is what I'm trying to. Well, I think, yeah,
Yeah, it's really cool how it came about. Because like I was telling you, I've studied a lot of stuff, and I would say I started to get into thinking about, for lack of a better term, gonna use it again, conspiracy theories, because there are real conspiracies.
sure.
I learned about the Gulf of Tonkin incident
Hmm.
when I was like 18 on a book report, and I was like, "Oh, wow." So the government just made up a whole story of why we had to go to war, and it was just 40 years later they found out it was fake, and I was like, "Damn." So my radar was always on for things are not what they seem, and then yeah, I would say probably I don't know, 15. I got into spirituality first, in like college, and then like
Mhm.
kind of a little bit after college, where that was my reality opening up, was the whole spiritual world and Eastern philosophy, meditation, all that. The UFO thing was always interesting to me, but I never that conditioning had already even got me enough where I just didn't really think about it seriously. It was just like cool to me. And then yeah, like I said, then I started learning about more government conspiracies that were proven true, and then just hearing other people's theories about things, and inevitably when you question reality, you're going to have to come across the UFO alien topic because it's so central to everything. It's one of the biggest the secrets that's out there. And yeah, that's a good point. And it was a funny journey because, like I said, I heard what actually kind of started me on a serious note was the Philip Corso book,
Hmm.
The Day After Roswell. And
Yep.
I the way I would feed my mind was just anything that's just totally new to me, that's like sounds crazy. I don't want to hear what they have to say, and it was like, oh, former Army lieutenant colonel who
Mhm.
worked in the foreign technology desk, totally real, wrote this book about what happened at Roswell, and I was like, oh, okay. And then yeah, after that, then the rabbit hole went. So, and then it was, yeah, like I said, probably like 2 years of a good consistent study where I was just going from book to book to book to question to question to person. And then it was just so funny because right when I was reaching the point of like some kind of turning point in my own understanding of how real it was, the
Mhm.
whole David Grush thing happened right at that point. And then so it was a really interesting timing. And yeah, so to go to your point, it is cool. It's really cool to get into the field at this point, and it's a fascinating field to study. Really is.
Yeah, it is. I enjoy it. I think once you go, and the nice thing is we talked about a few things tonight in the field. We talked about abductions. We talked about um, USOs a little bit. We talked about Roswell and just UFOs in general as they're flying in the air. But there's other paths you can take in ufology that
Mhm.
if you want to go down that rabbit hole, like um, here's a good conspiracy for you, and you can run with it or not run with it. I don't know, but or believe it or not believe it. It's a secret space program.
Mhm.
On the factual side, the U.S. government had a secret space program. It's documented. It was, the space shuttle was built for the military originally, and that's why it has the wings on it so it can change its path. It has a launch pad in Vanderbilt Air Force Base so that it can go on geopolar orbit. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
um, after there was a idea in the 60s and 70s to have a space station up there
Mhm.
that was manned by military astronauts that as a spying platform. All of this is documented. Um, War Zone magazine, for example, did a great article a few years ago about blueprints of space planes that the U.S. military was going to build, where they would launch under the belly of an aircraft. It would go up to 70,000 feet, and then it'll be released and fly in the low Earth orbit. Incidentally, today that's very similar to what Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic does. Um, but on the UFO side and the conspiracy side, and you got Admiral Byrd, who supposedly led a, um, a U.S. armada down to the Antarctic and fought an advanced human civilization that had flying saucers and alien technology, and then that spins out into um, the British hacker, which I can't remember his name.
McKinnon,
Thank you,
Gary
thank you.
McKinnon. Yeah.
So then you know about this, how he hacked it and
Yeah,
he
dude. Yeah,
masked that, and
I've covered. I've gone deep, but there's still more stuff, which is cool. The
yeah,
Nazi Antarctica thing is really interesting, man, and it's like there's really actually some compelling little breadcrumb trails of of that
There
really
is.
being possibly
There,
true.
there really is. And when you
Yeah,
look
dude.
at the, yeah, it's fascinating. So you can really run with this field, and you can take it in any direction you want.
Mhm.
Um,
You know,
and
one
you
thing. Yeah, sorry.
no, go
Uh,
ahead. Yeah.
one thing that I've been thinking about, and I'd like to ask you, is because I haven't. I'll just go all over the place, and at some point, I want to pick one thing, and I want it to be something that will add value to the field. You know what I mean? A million books on this, a million books on Roswell, like it's all interesting to me, but I want to find something where nobody or very few people have given it attention, and it could really add something valuable. Anything pop to mind for you that
That's a
you
really
know?
good question. Everything has been kind of, all the big topics have been done. I think, I don't think that any topic that's already been done can't be redone.
Mm,
But I think what you need is, even if you did Roswell, I mean, there's a lot of books on Roswell, and I think what makes like Tom Carney and Don Schmidt's books really good is they use primary sources of witness interviews, hundreds and hundreds of them. I think if I think you got to pick something that you like, and you have to find the evidence.
mm,
That's what it comes down to. You have to bring something new to the field that's evidence based, that is something concrete and solid. And I think that's why people got so excited with To the Stars Academy.
mhm,
When that came out with Tom DeLonge, and Tom DeLonge was talking about, I got the evidence. I have this evidence that he got his physical evidence from Linda Moulton Howe. Um, and he had Lou Alessandro, who came out and was talking about ATIP, and no one knew about ATIP. And here you have this government DIA guy talking about this program that was already talked about in the New York Times, and the fact that Lou Alessandro and Tom DeLonge, and they're working together. They have this. They're going to come out with all this evidence, this document or physical evidence, whatever you want to call it, and
mhm,
that blew up. That blew up the field, like for like you could say, obviously he had a 15 minutes of fame. The thing didn't last very long, but in that 15 minutes, what got him so much attention is the fact that he came out and said, I have something new in the way of evidence. And I think whatever field you choose, you have to go and find the evidence. It's just like, you work in academia, so you get the idea of having evidence for your documents and
right.
your research. Um, so it doesn't
I gotta
matter.
learn about FOIA requests because some of that stuff. I don't know if you've seen that guy, the Black Vault.
Yeah, yeah,
He has some really interesting documents that I stumbled upon one the other day where I was like, "Wow, this is," you know.
yeah.
So,
John
but
Greenwald
yeah,
Jr.
John Greenwell. Yeah, I have no idea how to do FOIA requests or any of that, but I gotta look at his website a little more because.
I mean, if you watch a lot of his podcasts, he talks about the rudimentaries of it. And I think he actually had a podcast, and it might be buried in his YouTube page, on how to do FOIA requests
Mhm.
and how to do them correctly, and how to go through the appeals process. I don't think they're that difficult. I think you just have to learn by
Is that the
trial and
pla
error.
when you talk about finding evidence as a starting point or a focus point, is that the first place to think is FOIA or other types of
Well,
evidence?
well, I think you have to be realistic with FOIA. If you watch John Greenwald Jr.'s podcast on YouTube, or you listen to him on a podcasting thing, he will talk a lot about, he'll get documents, and they'll be redacted. They'll be heavily redacted. Sometimes a whole page will be redacted, and you might get a word here, a word there, and a lot can be blacked out for national security purposes. Like if you watch the recent hearings on by the Arrow Group, um, a lot of what they're covered, he even says, is done behind closed doors. The first committee that they had in June of 2021, I think every other sentence, the guy in charge at the time said, "We'll talk about that in the closed door session. I can't reveal sources and methods, or I can't talk about that or reveal sources and methods." Um, but what that will do, and what John Greenwald says, is you start getting between the lines, but if you get enough pieces of the puzzle, eventually you get to see what the puzzle is. So you have 100 documents talking about what's in our night sky, for example. You FOIA that, you might get a few puns on a few crumbs here and there, but when you put it all together, you get a pretty good piece of the pie. There might be holes in it, but you might be able to see what it is. Or it
Mhm.
leads to keywords, as he always says. You know, he likes all of these reports because they lead to keywords that he'll then foil to get that. And then you keep foiling, you do another foil to get the next set and the next set and then. So it's like this
Yeah.
endless little trail. But
Yeah.
you don't even need the documents. I mean, evidence comes in a lot of forms, you know, depending on what your evidence is. If you, like, some people are more of investigators, so they'll go out and they'll stick a camera up in the sky and get hours and hours of recordings. And but then you have to rule out all the IFOs, like the you know, satellites and airplanes and all that other stuff that's up in the skies into the unknowns.
Mhm.
um, so evidence comes in many different forms. It doesn't have to be a document. But I think if you are going to pursue this and you want to go at a different angle, you need to. And I know you're asking me what's unique that hasn't been covered, and the answer is I don't know, because
Yeah.
you got to dig,
Yeah.
and then when you find whatever that is unique is, um, then that
Yeah.
will make a contribution to the field. Some of the best foil stuff that's out there is stuff that gets accidentally released, or
Mm.
so. You know, another great thing is Stanton Freeman. When he passed away, he left his entire archive of documents um, to a library in Canada. And last I heard, they're still sorting it through it to catalog it. But when
Wow.
that becomes available for public consumption, I mean, Stanton Freeman was a giant in the field. He spent, you know, his entire adult life researching and doing interviews and collecting documents. And
Mm.
you only know what he's going to have in his archives. So you're not going to know until you go out there and do it and look at him. And Stanton Freeman was known for, like, if you read his book on Majestic 12, and maybe you should. He wrote a really good book on the Majestic 12
Yeah,
documents.
he was convinced they were real. I read
He
Crash
was.
at Corona, and I remember him saying that.
Yeah. But he, if you remember in his book, he spent months at the National Archives
Wow.
digging through documents, verifying all the names and verifying where they were. So unless you go out and do that, you're not going to know what's out there. So I say go for it. Take a, you know, you're in academia, you get some time off. Go out there and
Yeah.
see what they got, because I
Yeah.
mean, you never know. It could be a gold mine of stuff.
Yeah. On a final note, you were talking about the Stan Freeman archives maybe opening up. One thing that I thought about, because I read through that UAP disclosure bill, that
Yeah.
right? Did you read that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I read it and I was like, well, this is great and fine, but I think they could have done a little more on the disclosure, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know,
There's been
yeah, yeah, I'm just a little frustrated with that.
there's like pros and cons, and there's definitely cons to be that are important. I think like the 9-person board is, and the fact that if you read it, the 9-person board can decide if a record should be postponed up, and they can continue that up to 25 years, and then even then the president at that time can still indefinitely extend it,
Yeah.
being not disclosed. So the craziest stuff they could technically just keep secret for forever. But one thing it made me think about though is how it will probably open up new dimensions of the field when, if it, first of all, if the bill goes through, second of all, if they have this National Archives thing, then like new documents will be coming out, right? In theory, and it should be interesting, and will probably shed light on a lot of different things. I don't know. I just thought about that when I was reading that bill.
I mean, I like your hope for that. I'm being more pessimistic on that. I think right
I'm
now
a
everything about Arrow
well,
is
Kirkpatrick's
classified.
gone, so that's good. But
Yeah, I mean, everything about that program now is classified or redacted. I mean, it's ridiculous. Um,
yeah,
But the other thing is going on to a side conspiracy. I mean, the Kennedy documents. There's still documents that haven't been released, and there was like, well, Obama was going to release them. Then Obama said no, he didn't release them. Then Trump was going to release them, and he said no. And I think Biden even was going to release them, and they said no. So like, what are they hiding? They were talking like almost 50 years now. I mean, everyone who was involved in the conspiracy is dead or like so old. Then it's what's the point at this point? So like, release the documents. So I'm a little more pessimistic. I'm going to go with your optimism, but I'm a little more pessimistic on these anything of value ever being truly released.
Fair, and I can't fault you for that. So, yeah, on that note, I think that's a good place to
Okay,
bring it to a close for today, and we're going to be definitely come back for round 2. We're going to
sounds
dive
good.
in. Yeah, we're going to dive into some more stuff. We'll go into USOs and whatever else comes from that.
Yeah, and we'll talk off camera about if you want to collaborate on something.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
And I that would be cool. I would like that.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun.
Sweet. So thank
Okay,
you, Mike. It was nice to meet you, and also nice to talk. Awesome to talk to you about all this.
oh
So
well, thank you for the invite, and I look forward to our next rounds.
yes, me too. I'll talk to you later.
Take care. Bye bye.
You too.